When Shakespeare first wrote Macbeth, there was no way he could have known that it would go on to become one of the most famous plays of all time. What makes Macbeth so universal is not its plot so much as its moral. It's a tale about tragedy and the carnage that awaits those who seek to gain power at any cost. Even then, this is not enough to explain why audiences worldwide have taken to the telling and retelling of Macbeth. But when we look at the times that Macbeth adaptations have been made, it's generally during times of immense political unrest. Through this controlled variable, we can then start to examine the differences in cultural values, as demonstrated by text appropriations. There's three societies we'll be exploring today: feudal Japan, 1990s Mumbai, and 21st century America. With that, we'll be looking at two key values in each appropriation: our sense of self and our conception of evil. Let's get started. The first text we'll be looking at is Akira Kurosawa's 1957 Throne of Blood, which explores the story of samurai warrior Washizu, who murders his general after being egged on by his ambitious wife Asahi, and his eventual murder once his crimes are discovered. Now, the plotline actually follows a very similar line to that of Macbeth, and the real difference is in the context. Feudal Japan was a time from around 794 AD to 1600 AD, when power was largely decentralized. There was still an emperor, but clans of samurais and noble families were the ones who truly held the balance of power. Throne of Blood is set during a civil war, and wars between the factions were common, as was offing one's leader when relations went south. And that's exactly what Washizu did to Suzuki, his lord. Kurosawa utilizes Japanese no drama, a form reliant upon aesthetics and visual cues to convey the Japanese values in the film. Our first major difference in plot points is the revelation of the fact that Lord Suzuki had actually killed his lord as well, and that's where murder becomes a grey area in Kurosawa's film, and we see our first major difference in cultural values: the characterization of evil. As discussed in my first talk, Shakespeare does portray evil as existing in a grey space, but being largely confined to those who are corrupted by devilish beings. More importantly, legitimate kings and authority are portrayed as inherently and equivocally good, such as King Duncan. Kurosawa meditates on a much darker concept, that evil and good are nuanced, and typical notions of authority, such as one's lord or emperor, are really no better than the supernatural. Lady Asahi, the wife of Washizu, echoes these messages in her insinuation that Suzuki would kill Washizu in an attempt to stop the prophecy from being realized, a far cry from the praise and honor bestowed on Macbeth by Duncan. No Drama and Kurosawa uses the interruption of geometry and symmetry to convey the skewing of morals and social order. During her encouraging of Washizu to kill Suzuki, Asahi's shape obscures the symmetrical lines in the room, conveying the unraveling social order at her hands, as shown in this mid-shot. This is representative of Buddhist beliefs and values that were entering Japan during its feudal years, and the Buddhist idea that no one is inherently good and inherently bad. There are really just actions and reactions. But Kurosawa takes aim at a larger murkiness, cosmic ambiguity, and our sense of self in the world. While Shakespeare represents the breakdown of natural order as a result of regicide, Kurosawa conveys the futility of regicide and other acts of political ambition by the individual in the face of the universe. Kurosawa again uses no drama in his depiction of the spiderweb forest where all of our characters live, and the fog-drenched maze where the spirit first appears, and the Japanese version of Birnam Wood. The forest exists in a supernatural space, a key trope of no drama, and its entangling undergrowth and deep mist convey how the universe will ultimately quell any human ambition or creation, a humbling reminder to those in the pursuit of power. This is antithetical to Shakespeare's Macbeth, where the death of the sovereign results in the breaking down of world order. Again, we see how the individualist context of the West is trumped by the insignificance of oneself in Japanese ideologies. This is suggestive of feudal Japan's Shinto beliefs about nature and the way gods manifest themselves in nature. Now fast forward a couple of centuries. We're now in 1990s Mumbai. We're in the post-colonialist territory as British rule has ceased. We're seeing conflict between Hindu nationalism and economic liberalisation. In other words, political unrest. By the 1990s, organised crime syndicates in India were booming as a primary source of income for many of Mumbai's top rollers. obviously a very different setting to the monarchical Scotland of the 17th century. The next appropriation we'll be discussing is Vishal Bhardwaj's Makbul, the 2003 crime film set at the height of Mumbai's crime underworld. Again, the plot corresponds with that of Macbeth. Makbul is an up-and-coming gang member who murders his boss and mentor, Abaji, in search of becoming the Don, or chief gang member. Meanwhile, he has an affair with Abaji's, as previously mentioned, the 20th mistress, Nimi, who coaxes Makbul into killing Abaji. As previously mentioned, the 20th century saw the birth of post-colonialism for India, and many Indian directors tried to make sense of a British-influenced society through the Bollywoodization of many Western stories. Think Pride and Prejudice, turned Bride and Prejudice, and Aisha as the Slumdog Millionaire. Makbul is no exception. Bhardwaj both subverts and embraces the values of traditional Indian and Jacobean worldviews to present the values of a globalist post-colonial Indian context, namely the ideas surrounding one's sense of self and the conception of evil in this society. The shift in values is again clear in the translation of medieval Scotland to the 1990s Mumbai. While both Macbeth and Makbul strive to achieve their political ambitions, Makbul is acutely aware of his limitations and insignificance in the universe, and his quest for power is coupled with his desire for legitimacy, whereas Macbeth only becomes aware of his trivial role in the world after the failure of his ambitions. The presentation of legitimacy as the defining goal for Makbul's life is seen as his quest to find legitimacy through his replacing of Abaji as gang leader and Nimi's constant reassurance that their relationship is pak, meaning pure, where the repetition denotes Makbul's constant need for affirmation of his legitimacy. The alienated and illegitimate nature of Makbul and his crime syndicate is again conveyed through the tying of the gang to Islam, which is seen as the other in the predominantly Hindi India. This is seen in several ways: the character's constant referral to Muslim religious traditions such as Ramadan and Eid, the costuming of the characters in traditional Muslim outfits, and the scenes of the characters engaging in Muslim prayer. This shows us the values concerning one's sense of self in post-colonial India. It's heavily impacted by thousands of years of Hindu ideology and caste systems. Makbul's Muslim adherence and low social standing is implied to have stemmed from his undesirable caste, rendering him illegitimate as a leader, contrasting to the noble backgrounds of both Macbeth and the characters resembling Macbeth in other appropriations of Macbeth, conveying how context translates into values. Remember, 1990s India was becoming increasingly progressive, abolishing the caste system and so on, which led to a rise in Hindu nationalism in the face of post-colonial liberalization. In effect, Makbul is a meditation on the hybrid culture that has sprung from this conflict and the values within it. In terms of the presentation of evil in Makbul, we must refer back to the setting, which takes place almost exclusively in underworld Mumbai. In contrast to Macbeth, a once noble man who has turned evil, Makbul's social context means that evil is natural for him, and even a necessity for survival. Again, we see a shift in values from the original text to the appropriation of evil in both texts. In fact, all notion of Makbul's goodness stem from his fleeting loyalty to Abaji, who is a mafia boss, showing how evil is the key tenet of this context. The all-encompassing nature of evil in Bhardwaj's film is conveyed through the translation of Shakespeare's Weird Sisters, the epitome of evil, into corrupt policemen. The irony of this is obvious. A police officer is meant to be the upholder of justice, but instead, they're just as bad as everyone else. This is indicative of the rampant corruption that has plagued India for decades, and Bhardwaj sheds light on the inescapability of wrongfulness in his film and the wider Indian social setting. This demonstrates the difference in cultural values. For my last appropriation, we're heading to a more familiar context: 21st century America. Political divides, populism, and geopolitical tensions have all led to a disenchantment with politicians and justified fears of corruption and collusion within Western democracy. Beau Willimon plays on these fears in his 2013 web series House of Cards, which follows the story of Democrat Congressman Frank Underwood's ascent to the White House through dubious means. Now, this isn't a film or a play. It's continuous, and the last season hasn't even been released yet. In terms of all the appropriations, HOC is the one that diverges from the plot the most. Frank has no prophecy read to him, and he's a sociopath. He has no moral compass, constantly lies, and really only cares about himself in the end. But Willimon has borrowed heavily from the Scottish play in his creation of Underwood and his leading lady, Claire Underwood, and we can see the translation of values from the original text to the appropriation. First of all, House of Cards perfectly captures his context sense of self in its portrayal of Frank Underwood. Frank Underwood perfectly embodies Western individualism, or the idea that one should seek to advance their personal goals over literally everyone else's. This is typical of the capitalist setting of the United States, where the rejection of government interference and nanny states has caused a more libertarian outlook on personal freedom. Of course, Frank takes this to sinister extremes, but the exaggeration of this value conveys its salience in Western society. The only person who Frank sees as truly equal to him is his wife, Claire, and this is conveyed through mid-shots of them sharing cigarettes at the window, whereas Frank Underwood talks down to literally everybody else, as seen in mid-shots and long shots depicting his dominance over them. Not only does he move from position to position, his power and political capital only builds as he ends the careers and lives of people who threaten his power. This ruthlessness is highlighted in the soliloquy given after Zoe's murder. The extreme close-up conveys Frank's lack of moral qualms over killing her. Finally, House of Cards makes a profound statement on the power of evil in 21st century America. It's limitless. Unlike all other versions of Macbeth, where ruthless killers eventually meet their downfall, Frank Underwood always wins. He works his way out of every situation, and the audience is there to see it all, and they root for him. This is called anti-heroism, a concept that entered American literature in a major way in the 1960s. Anti-heroes, like morals, idealism, and empathy. Frank is a classic anti-hero, and his success as a character is explained by the public psyche's increasing desire to live wild and dark fantasies vicariously. As an audience becomes emotionally desensitized to content, anti-heroes thrive. The key way Frank Underwood maintains his audience's favour is through his breaking of the fourth wall, which he does at key moments throughout the episodes. The direct eye contact makes the audience feel as though they are Frank's accomplice and friend, on some level, and thus complicit in his crimes. We all know Frank is evil, but we root for him, allowing his bad deeds to continue on indefinitely. Hence, through the study of these texts, we see how appropriations convey the difference in values between four different societies. All four have different ideas about the individual in the world and how evil manifests itself in its society. Thank you.